He says cannabis is not a medicine for the simplest possible reason. We do not smoke medicines, even though
it smacks of rage farming or outrage farming. He's making a bunch of unsupported claims that seem to be designed to provoke an emotional response. And this is a classic method for building your social media audience, following, clicks, likes, and follows. We could name certain social media influencers that seem to actively practice this.
Yeah.
I'll just throw one name out.
Welcome, Dr. Robert Malone. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Rev. What do you want to talk about today?
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about, and you've been on the show multiple times before, including when Jay was still part of the show, but he's moved on to bigger and better things at the NIH.
I don't know that he thinks it's necessarily better. I don't think he's having a whole lot of fun. He's doing his best to do a good job, and he's an amazing guy, but that's not a pleasant job to do that he has right now.
Yeah, it's one of those things in life where you think of someone in that position, such an esteemed, honorable position with so much power and influence, but you get there, and I mean, it just looks so difficult and so challenging to manage all of what he's managing, all the institutes and all the different competing interests and lobbies and this, that, and the other. I don't know if anyone can really envy that position exactly.
I think he's really he's one of a couple, I would say, also Dr. Oz, that are really exceeding expectations in the initial high-profile appointees. I think Jay is really, he's managed to work effectively and quietly in a world, kind of much like the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has done. There hasn't been a lot of drama, a fair amount of drama in pushing back against him, but not any drama coming from Jay at all. I think he's doing a great public service in a very difficult position.
Yeah, and Jay always has been incredibly honest and ethical and charitable in dealing with COVID matters, which some people on the more conspiratorial fringes of our movement have not liked that about him. But that's why I decided to collaborate with him, is that I knew he always tries to stick with the facts and be as objective and impartial as possible. And he's doing a great job at the NIH. And I'm really happy to see someone who's in a political position for the right reasons and not just for power hungry, control, money, and influence oriented reasons. So I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, we're aligned. No self-aggrandizement coming from Jay Bhattacharya, which is just refreshing.
Yeah. So with you, also changes with you since you last came on the podcast. In June, you were appointed to the advisory committee on immunization practices by HHS Secretary Bobby Kennedy. So congrats on that. When I saw that, I was really, really happy to see it.
This is should it be congratulations or condolences? It depends on your point of view.
Yeah. Anything you want to say on how that came about?
It was a mystery to me. I had been vetted for over 2 months on conflicts of interest and potential financial considerations, whether or not I would be able to maintain a Substack in the context of being considered for a position as a special government employee, but a paid one within the office of the Assistant Secretary of Health. And then out of the blue, I learned via corporate media that the secretary had appointed me. He actually kind of did a slip of the lip. He said he appointed me as vice chair together with Martin Koldorf as chairperson, or co-chair, I think he's what he said. But technically, co-chair doesn't exist as a position in the ACIP charter. I'm actually vice chairperson. So that's been an interesting situation. Of course, Dr. Koldorf now has been promoted to a key advisory position within the government. And that chairperson role has now been taken over by Dr. Kirk Milhound, who is a pediatric cardiologist, a friend of mine, and just a stellar individual, just like Jay is. Kirk is a pastor of a established church that he and his wife have basically enabled on Maui in Hawaii. He has run a free clinic for many years on Maui. He travels internationally to provide outreach services to distressed people in emerging economies. And he's been forced out of his hospital appointment, prior hospital position, as has his wife at the main hospital in Maui, and forced to, because of the sin of providing early treatment to Hawaiians suffering from COVID. And of course, this included the agent ivermectin. So he was kind of railroaded out of that. And so now he has to do locum tenens and travels to Texas from Maui to practice his craft and save children. So it's a great step to be able to work with Kirk in this way. I'm grateful for it. And as vice chair, because Kirk was already scheduled to travel to Hong Kong to present a cardiology paper during the last ACIP meeting, he had to dial it in. And so by charter, that means the vice chair has to step up to the podium and manage the meetings, which is what took place in the recent ACIP meeting that I had to chair in his stead, that covered, among other things, the decision about no longer requiring or advocating for the birth dose within the first 12 hours of hepatitis B vaccine for children, newborn children.
Yeah. So you've brought it up perfectly. So wanted to get into that first. So yeah, as you said, there was this vote a couple weeks ago, and the vote was 8-3 for ending the universal hepatitis B birth dose for infants born to mothers who test negative for hepatitis B. And that still doesn't change the fact that infants born to hepatitis B positive mothers are still required within 12 hours to get it. And
I wouldn't say required; they're recommended.
recommended.
Terms. Yeah.
And the full hepatitis B vaccine series is still recommended for all children.
That's not true. That is not true. So there's a lot of disinformation in the press.
Okay.
And there was some confusion in
Perplexity
the
might have lied to me.
There was some confusion in the bullet points that were published by HHS once this recommendation was accepted by the Deputy Secretary, who is of HHS, Joe Neal, who is acting as director of the CDC. So I covered the language in a breakdown of the specifics of the language of the two votes that were made affirmative. You mentioned the first of those two. The second vote is still under consideration by the secretary for whether or not he's going to approve, disapprove, or modify. The first vote, the wording is, I can't tell you how much conflict there was in the nuance of development of the nuance of that wording. It's the behind the scenes was extremely contentious and very difficult to manage as the acting chairperson. It was probably the most stressful group meeting management task I've ever taken on in my entire professional career. I've been trained in group management in industry. So it was extremely stressful and contentious. And of course, we had all the coordinated hate coming at us from the affiliates, liaison organizations. But the nuance of the wording is, in short, and I covered this in detail in a Substack
Yep.
for anybody that wants to dive into that. And the language that was accepted by the acting director of the CDC, Jim O'Neill, is essentially the same as what was approved for question 1 by ACIP in the vote that you refer to. So the nuance is, as you say, absolutely no change. And we didn't even vote on that. We did not take up the issue. We were not asked to take up the issue of the birth dose in cases where the mother is hepatitis B positive. The data there are unequivocal that infants born of hepatitis B positive mothers are at significant risk for development of hepatitis B. And furthermore, if they contract early in childhood, and particularly in infancy at birth, etc., then they become more likely to develop chronic hepatitis and the complications, which include, of course, hepatic cancer, hepatocellular cancer. So,
Is that related to liver disease? Because I heard some things about that.
the
About
liver
elevated
disease is a soft and squishy way of saying what I just
Okay.
said more
For
precisely.
the rubes like me who don't know anything about medical science.
So, the recommendation stands that children born of hepatitis B positive mothers receive both the birth dose and hepatitis B immunoglobulin. And that seems to be very effective at preventing hepatitis B infection in the newborn infant. The question then comes up, well, what about those children for which we, born of mothers for which we don't have data on whether they're positive or negative? These are extremely rare cases. It's essentially medical malpractice to not know what the hepatitis B status is of the mother at the time of birth. And should it be the case that a random mother comes in off the street, the hepatitis B test can be administered quite promptly in hospital-based environments. And so there's no reason to not know the status of a mother. But if the status is unknown, then the guidance remains that for unknown status, the child, the newly born infant, it's recommended that the infant shall be vaccinated and dosed with immunoglobulin. Okay, so now we put aside that part. Now let's talk about the extremely low risk of transmission, almost vanishingly close to zero, or the infectivity risk. We call this, it's largely horizontal transmission to a child born of a hepatitis B negative mother. The incidence of a child born to a hepatitis B negative mother who is living in an environment in which they are not surrounded by hepatitis B positive close contacts is functionally zero. So the new recommendation is that number one, there shall be a consultation between the physician and the parent in that case about whether or not the parent, because it's the parent's choice. This is all grounded in us, the ACIP and in HHS in general, trying to move away from the utilitarian logic of the greatest good of the greatest number for the greatest number, and the logic that the state has the right to impose medical procedures on citizens, which is what happens with a mandate, with a vaccine mandate. So we want to move away from that, and we want to create a culture in which what's normative for medical procedures in general and vaccines in particular is true informed consent. So the wording that is used here is that functionally, there should be a consultation between the medical care provider and the patient concerning the risks and benefits associated with hepatitis B vaccine of the child, and that it is the prerogative of the parent to decide, or guardian, to decide whether or not the child receives hepatitis B vaccine. Okay, so that's key.
Yeah.
Whether or not, if or when is the specific wording, the child is to receive hepatitis B vaccine. That opens the door for a parent who chooses to not have their child vaccinated for hepatitis B. This is no longer a mandate in that sense. And that's going to cause, all kinds of problems in states and school systems that have been requiring these things. It also suggests, I think is the word, that if you do elect to have your child accept a hepatitis B vaccine, that the initial dose be delayed until at least 2 months of age. The rationale for this is that the developing child has a maturation of 2 months in their liver function, kidney function, which are crucial for clearance, and central nervous system in particular, which is susceptible to inflammation and other things that, the notorious brain swelling. So what we've created is a structure wherein parents are empowered, medical care providers are required to provide much more comprehensive informed consent, including documentation that they have informed the parent of risks and benefits of the product. And that's a simple thing to do. You can just cite the package insert. So they don't need any special thing to know what it is they need to say to parents. It's right there in the package insert in every single dose of hepatitis B vaccine that they administer in their office. So they can't complain about that. That has to be shared with the parent. And the parent has the right to decide. Now, what's been going on is that organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics has been advancing now for a number of years the logic that pediatricians should fire their patients if they're not fully compliant with the vaccine schedule. And in this case now, the AAP has diverged from ACIP and CDC guidance and federal guidance. The American Academy of Pediatrics, which is functionally a medical guild largely funded by the pharmaceutical industry, is now making their own recommendations for what the vaccine schedule should be. And presumably they are advising based on their current policies, that their patients, their guild members, their practitioners that are boarded by AAP, fire their patients and their parents by extension that are not fully compliant with the vaccine schedule. This has been documented as resulting in something a little bit over 51% of all pediatricians in the United States now have as a routine practice that they will fire you from their practice if your child is not fully compliant with the current vaccine schedule. This, by the way, is illegal in many nations. It's totally contrary to established medical ethics, but hey, medical ethics mid-20th century medical ethics seem to have gone out the window since 2020. AAP, by the way, has also been strong advocates for gender reassignment surgery. They're the ones that strongly advocated for mask use on children of all ages, including in schools. They are the ones that Secretary Kennedy recently has pulled their grant funding because they were non-compliant with the president's directive to eliminate DEI language and practices. So AAP is kind of a rogue organization.
Mm-hmm.
and but they are still influencing a very large number of the practicing pediatricians in the United States.
Not to clarify, because people might still be confused, is the recommendation that mothers who, children of mothers who test negative for hepatitis B, that at 2 months, there is the recommendation to get it or to consult
No,
with their doctors?
no. The recommendation is that parents are to be provided information in consultation with their healthcare provider about hepatitis B vaccine. Parents can choose if or when, that's the specific language, to vaccinate their children. If they elect to initiate early hepatitis B vaccination with the first dose, it's suggested that they defer the first dose until 2 months. But the reporting that that what we recommended and the secretary is now approved, I mean, the acting director is now approved, that we only deferred the first dose until 2 months. That's fake news. That is not the language that we voted on, and it's not the language that's been approved by the Deputy Secretary of HHS, Jim O'Neill, who's acting as the director of the CDC.
Okay.
Yeah, fake news. Sorry.
Gotcha. I was reading different opinions on this. One quote unquote expert, Dr. Ulrich von Andrian, president of the American Association of Immunologists, said that he's extremely disappointed in the decision. He says, quote, delaying the vaccine would mark a dangerous departure from decades of achievement in preventing hepatitis B infection and its complications. Recent independent analysis warns that even a modest delay could result in a substantial increase in preventable chronic infections like comma, liver cancers and deaths. Adrian said, now is not the time to undermine confidence in one of the most successful vaccine-based public health interventions in modern history. What's your response to that?
So this is a false narrative that's being promoted, and it's being done so in a coordinated fashion. This is essentially propaganda. If it was so apocalyptic, then why virtually every other industrialized, wealthy nation only initiates at earliest hepatitis B dosing at 2 months? This language and it's a cultural belief. This is like a catechism in this topic is inconsistent with the actual data. What happened here, just to reel back in time, is that Martin Koldorf kind of unilaterally came up with some recommendation language at the prior ACIP meeting. And I couldn't vote on that, and neither could many of the way it was worded. And neither could many of the ACIP members. I voted to table the motion, and I think that was the only person that voted against tabling it was Dr. Koldorf at that point in time. And then the committee asked the CDC for more data. And in particular, what the CDC had done historically was, and many of these individuals, such as the physician that you're quoting, had relied on an incomplete set of data having to do with hepatitis B vaccine effectiveness. And what had been done is to select a window of time that was relatively recent. Instead of looking back in time to when we had the surge of hepatitis B historically that triggered all of this, and then following the different age cohorts and how their incidence of hepatitis B had changed over time since that point in time. So to recap, the reason why we had a surge of hepatitis B in the United States can be traced back to the Vietnam War. Hepatitis B is endemic in parts of Africa and Asia, and particularly Southeast Asia, because a fair amount also in India and Pakistan. So, post Vietnam War, you'll recall, I think you're old enough, I'm not sure, I certainly am, that we lost that war. And there had been a number of Vietnamese and Cambodians that had supported the American war effort that were allowed entry into the United States as that war effort collapsed. And with those families that were brought in that had been helping the United States military in their campaign came a large burden of hepatitis B virus. And so we had a huge surge in hepatitis B. And if you push the timeline back to when that actually happened, and then look at the data, and you look at the different age cohorts, what it reveals, and this was first presented at this recent ACIP meeting. So the false narrative that there's no new data here and we're making our decisions based on absence of data, that completely ignored the fact that yes, there was a major new reveal of data from the CDC's own database, from the CDC's own data analyses, which showed that what happened is that a variety of, we call them non-pharmaceutical interventions, and by the way, that's been the history of public health, is this false narrative that vaccines are responsible for all the decrease in infectious disease. No, most of that decrease is actually due to non-pharmaceutical interventions, things like sanitation and various behavioral changes. But in the case of hepatitis B, the data showed that before the implementation of the hepatitis B vaccine, we already saw a major decline in the incidence of hepatitis B after that peak when you had initially this large wave of immigration of hepatitis B positive Southeast Asians. And then what happened is that with an earlier version of the hepatitis B vaccine, there was a really strong campaign to target individuals who were at high risk for hepatitis B transmission. So these are largely sex workers and IV drug abusers. So they were targeted, and you can see in the data that was actually a very effective campaign. And the bulk of the reduction in incidence of hepatitis B occurs in those more mature age cohorts. Now, the incidence of hepatitis B in children, in newborns, has always been extremely low. It was those cohorts that with high risk behaviors, typically adults and the immigrants, that were responsible for the surge in hepatitis B cases, and their incidence really crashed quite precipitously with what was a successful public health intervention campaign. But historically, the public health community became very frustrated with the fact that they could not get more widespread uptake of hepatitis B vaccine. And there's a New York Times article that I've posted and others have back from the day when these universal birth dose recommendations were first implemented, in which it's explicitly acknowledged that the logic was that it was necessary to implement the birth dose because the campaign to target the high-risk individuals was not being sufficiently successful. But when you look back at the data now that's available, because these data take time to come out, so they basically acted out of frustration before they had the real data and implemented this. This is a kind of a pattern that you see with ACIP. So before they had the data, they acted out of frustration and a sense of, we could speculate about whether or not there were financial incentives associated with the industry that would like to have more widespread uptake of their product. In any case, that was the decision was made basically, as well documented by the New York Times, that since we can't get all of them as adults, we have to get them as newborns. And that was absolutely the logic for implementing the birth dose. All of this other chatter that you're hearing is made up. It's not what was done at the time as well documented. And this apocalyptic language that we're going to have, the various numbers were thrown out during the ACIP meeting by the various medical guilds, the liaisons, that we're going to, cause thousands of children to get hepatitis B. And well, it never has been thousands of children getting hepatitis B in the United States. So it's hard to imagine how that's going to suddenly start happening. This was all just, fear-based messaging. I'm choosing my words. Usually use stronger language for that. That has no basis in fact. It raises the specter once again that these various medical guilds are being influenced by the industry, which is in almost every single case providing significant funding for these medical guilds in their daily operations.
Yeah, and other countries like my own Canada, we don't have a universal childbirth day hepatitis B vaccination for mothers who test negative.
And hepatitis B in infants is rampant in Canada. It's a huge problem. No, sorry.
Yeah. So this connects to the next topic that we want to get into here, which is reports that HHS may radically change the current U.S. vaccine schedule to align more with Denmark's schedule.
It's not May.
Pardon?
It's not a May statement. It's a will statement. It's a question of when.
Okay. And I heard some reports saying that this would be in 2026 at some point in the next couple months.
Probably Q1.
Yep.
And this is a presidential directive to the secretary. Okay, so Trump, in almost immediately after this ACIP vote that has resulted in a tiny incremental change in the hepatitis B schedule. I mean, the amount of drama around this compared to the nature of the change is enormously disproportionate. But
correct.
The president issued a proclamation to the secretary that he wished the entire childhood vaccine schedule restructured, and I think specifically called out the Danish schedule, and also, as I recall, Japan and was it Germany as other exemplars that should be considered by HHS as it considers restructuring the childhood vaccine schedule. And because it's coming as a presidential directive to the secretary, then the ACIP doesn't really have technically a role in that. The ACIP is only advisory. ACIP does not set policy.
Yeah.
Policy must be set by political appointees or elected officials, and that's the way it should be. Then they're the ones that can be held accountable, and not appointed committees. So policy is set by, in this case, typically the director of the CDC, and the ACIP serves as an advisor to the director of the CDC. But now we have the president stepping in, directly telling the Secretary of Health that he wants the Secretary of Health to get it done. I think this is a red-green moment for HHS. Get her done, and to use a Canadian analogy, and the president is telling the secretary to do this thing, to do it promptly. And so the decision is that there really isn't a need for advisory from ACIP. This is being done at an executive level. And so the decision about how to reorganize the vaccine schedule is going to be handled at a higher level in essentially at the executive level within HHS. And Secretary Kennedy and his associates will make whatever decisions they deem appropriate to comply with the president's orders. And they'll seek whatever advice they need to seek. They don't need to go to a independent advisory board. They have plenty of talent within FDA, CDC, NIH, et cetera, to draw on to make informed decisions about restructuring the schedule, and that's what they're going to do.
I have a couple of questions about this for you. First of all, what do you think is the rationale for trying to shift the U.S. vaccine schedule to align with Denmark's or other related countries? Like, what's special about Denmark's vaccine schedule?
Well, all of the so the observation is that, and so to roll it back, Tracy Beth Hogue, who is
Friend of the show.
currently the acting director of the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and happens to also have been a key player in a lot of the epidemiology that was done, for instance, for the state of Florida under Joe Latipo in evaluating data relating to the COVID vaccine products and COVID in general. So Tracy is well trained. And by the way, one of those that have trained her so rigorously is a key ACIP member, my colleague, Dr. Retzef Levy. So Tracy is hardcore. She does her job. She's not influenced by political considerations. She's not a partisan. She is not an anti-vaxxer. She's just a straightforward, get the job done, hardcore medical epidemiologist.
Yeah, and just for a bit of context, just to interrupt for a second, she's been on the podcast multiple times, including one time I had her debate Dr. Denis Rancourt on his paper on the COVID vaccine having killed, I forget what the exact number was, but millions of COVID deaths. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that would have been fun.
She took the stance that there wasn't enough evidence to say that the COVID vaccine had taken as many millions of lives. I forget what the exact number was that Denis claimed. So there she was being attacked by the more anti-vax crowd. So she's a very fair and objective person.
Yeah, she is. Absolutely. She's rigorous. And so, by the way, she's the one that initiated the review of the pediatric deaths reported in VAERS that resulted in the reveal of at least 10 cases that are rigorously associated with the receipt of the vaccine product.
Yep.
That has triggered so much consternation.
Mm-hmm.
So Tracy, I don't know if it was discussed on your podcast, but Tracy is an interesting person in that she had her child, and she comes from Denmark. So she understands the vaccine schedule in Denmark quite personally, as well as the American vaccine schedule. And she provided at the recent ACIP meeting a presentation in which she just did a straightforward comparison of A versus B. I infer that the president saw that based on his comments. And I think that's part of why the Danish schedule is called out in the president's directive. But he also, as I mentioned, listed Japanese and, as I recall, German. So I think that was part of why that was called out. The Danish schedule is quite minimalist compared to the American schedule. And yet, there is no um, significant difference in incidence of things like influenza deaths or hepatitis B.
Yeah, and
And
just you mentioned minimalist. For people who don't know, the U.S. recommends 72 childhood vaccines for 18 diseases, whereas Denmark only recommends 11 for 10 diseases.
and those are, we're listing, just to be clear, I think you're listing the number of doses of vaccine
Yeah,
typically administered, not the number of separate vaccines. That's often kind of missed in the language that's used. But
yeah.
yes, this is
So
true.
72 to 11. That's a massive disparity.
Huge. And one of the outstanding issues is whether or not, in particular, the repeated administration of childhood vaccines, these are typically killed or subunit vaccines, that include the adjuvant of aluminum salts, typically referred to as alum, that are in individual vaccines, the dose of aluminum salts is required to be below a certain threshold that is known to be toxic. So aluminum salts are toxic, like many things, at a too high a dose, and they have a fairly narrow what's called therapeutic window. So you can easily overdose a child on aluminum salts, and it has there are various research that demonstrate that, particularly in animal models, that dosing with aluminum salts can cause, among other things, neurotoxicity. Neurotoxicity is a surrogate for, among other things, autism in terms of language. So the issue there is, well, it may be that dosing with vaccine X at dose Y doesn't cause aluminum salt toxicity, but you're using the same basic adjuvant product, these aluminum salts, in multiple vaccines, and no one has looked at rigorously the combined effect of all these vaccines and the aluminum salt dose, and that has been tallied up, and a strong case can be made that the combined dose of aluminum salts, when you receive all these doses, exceeds the allowable thresholds for toxicity. So, why in a environment in which we clearly have a unacceptable incidence of chronic diseases, including neurologic diseases of children, uh, and these seem to track back to approximately the time when the vaccine schedule exploded in the United States, concurrent with the liability protection that was provided to the manufacturers. There's a circumstantial uh, coincidence between these various symptoms and the rise of certain chronic diseases of childhood, including neurologic diseases. And so the logic is, well, what's been said is, well, we don't have any definitive evidence that there's a cause and effect. But what was clearly documented in the ACIP meeting the other day was that it's kind of like a almost an intentional absence of evidence, is what it appears. There's a strange lack of definitive studies on toxicities associated with these various vaccine products. And so to say that, well, there's no data that shows that it's harmful is a little disingenuous,
Hmm.
because there's almost no data on whether it is or isn't harmful. And so to say the absence of data means that there is an absence of toxicity is disingenuous. The absence of data is the absence of data. And we don't know whether, if we didn't have that absence of data, whether it would show the safety that is so loudly proclaimed by various uh, um, medical guilds or in the pharmaceutical industry, or would it be that if we actually had rigorous data, we would see something different?
Mm.
and it's a rather odd failure of the CDC to gather these data after decades, given all the pressure that's been put on the CDC, including by Congress, to get those data. So CDC seems to be kind of willfully ignorant in terms of the documentation about vaccine harms or lack thereof. And so the assertion has been, well, we don't have the data, so therefore we have to assume that it's safe, but it's just as easy to assume that it's not safe. And usually, when we're thinking about the principle of maleficence and the guidance to do no harm, that the assumption is usually made to protect the patient and err on the side of caution when you don't have enough data to make a clear decision about safety.
So it sounds like you support shifting the U.S. vaccine schedule towards Denmark's.
So, Rev, the honest truth is it's irrelevant whether I support it or not. It's a presidential directive.
Well, sure. I'm
Um,
just asking for your thoughts.
my thoughts are that we clearly need more data, and that this should be done in a methodical fashion, and it should be carefully considered. And the data that are available should be carefully considered before a decision is made. But I'm the process that will be undertaken will be above my pay grade. I don't know, and my pay grade, by the way, at the ACIP is 0. These are volunteer positions that we all have here. So all of us are putting in way too many hours, unpaid hours, to support this diligence at the ACIP. And we have many other topics that we have to focus on. So, not the least of which is the safety and effectiveness of the SARS-CoV-2 mRNA products. And now I'm going to, I think as of tonight, the terms of reference, which is essentially the statement of work for the influenza vaccine subcommittee, will be published. And that's the kickoff. I'm supposed to chair, I'm chairing that committee. I wrote that tour together with my colleague. And we have to take on the whole issue of influenza vaccines and the routine influenza vaccine recommendations and what the heck is going on with negative effectiveness that is being documented by, say, the Cleveland Clinic and many other more recent studies, suggesting that this policy of annual influenza vaccine for seasonal influenza vaccines, for seasonal influenza virus, the annual vaccine policy, I think the kindest thing we could say is it's not working.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, but before we do that, just one thing on the Denmark thing. So I was reading different opinions on this, and there was one piece in Stat News by Dr. Jake Scott, who is an
Yeah, Jake Scott, by the way, is the guy that embarrassed himself in the Ron Johnson hearings. Jake Scott is a notorious vaccine industry shill.
Okay. Yeah, so he's an infectious disease physician and clinical associate professor at Stanford.
Stanford,
And
yeah, but he testified that he had lost hundreds of patients to SARS-CoV-2, which is
mm,
not the experience of the physicians that I've been working with.
mm,
Jake Scott's clinical acumen and his scientific acumen, he really embarrassed himself with the claims that he had made regarding the data supporting vaccine safety and effectiveness at the Ron Johnson hearings.
mm.
Aaron Siri basically methodically took him apart. And then he accused me of promoting hate against vaccine advocates and CDC personnel because I had published in Substack 2 memes on Friday and Sunday that had some reference to Elizabeth Warren's statement that you don't need 20 rounds to be a good hunter. And the counterpoint was you don't need to uh, disarm you don't need to disarm the populace if you're a good leader. And Senator Blumenthal suggested that, and the other one that I published was a revolver with one bullet in the chamber uh, that said that I think it was so 6 shooter, 5 out of 6 scientists all agree that Russian roulette is safe. It was clearly a meme based on the statistics of a rare event that has catastrophic consequences, but both Jake Scott and the senator asserted that this was Robert Malone promoting violence against vaccine advocates, I guess like Jake Scott and the
Yeah.
CDC. So Jake Scott is just not a credible player. He is a total vaccine shill.
Okay. So I was reading Dr. Jake Scott's piece in Stat News, and he on the U.S. shifting their vaccine schedule to match Denmark's. And to be honest, I was pretty unconvinced by his piece. But uh, he went from virus to virus, explaining the rationale for different vaccination schedules. And his point essentially about Denmark is that he said Denmark has universal healthcare, greater access to healthcare, which the U.S. does not, and so you can't really compare it. And then he continues to say that
Yeah, that argument was floated by. So basically, what he's doing is he's recapitulating the arguments that were made by the various uh, medical guilds during the ACIP meeting. But think about it. What is he saying there? What data are there to support? He's basically picking out the differences between the U.S. and Denmark and saying, well, that makes it so that this logic of reducing the complexity of the vaccine schedule has no merit. But where are the data to support that? I mean, he's criticizing ACIP for absence of data, but basically all he's doing is promoting an emotional argument.
Yeah. Yeah, and then he goes on to make more specific, quasi arguments, at least about children being primary drivers of influenza, and so vaccinating them not only protects the kids but also.
Where's the data, Jake, showing that?
Yeah.
I mean, what he's doing is he's throwing up the argument style here. The debate style is called straw man.
Yep.
He's throwing up straw men and then knocking those straw men down, but they have no merit. There's no data to support what he's saying. It's just throwing, spaghetti on the wall.
Yeah. I'll just quote a couple more sentences from him. He says, even with universal coverage, why accept tens of thousands of preventable hospitalizations when we have the tools to prevent them? Why watch infants struggle to breathe with RSV when we can prevent it? Why wait for the rare but devastating case of meningococcal? I'm going to totally mispronounce that.
Yeah, meningococcal
Purpura fulminanis when vaccination can stop it all from happening.
The answer is, Jake, because the state does not have the right to mandate medical procedures on the citizens. That is the fundamental issue here. Jake Scott is advocating a utilitarian socialist argument that the state has the right to mandate medical procedures for its citizens. And the president disagrees. Bobby Kennedy disagrees. I disagree. If somebody
and the American people seem to disagree with that very strongly.
I agree. So if we provide parents or adults with the information documenting vaccine effectiveness and safety, if that information is sufficiently compelling, they will accept the products. In Denmark and Sweden, I believe, and many of the Nordic countries, there are no vaccine mandates. They have great compliance with their recommendations, but they're not mandated. Why? Because the people have confidence in public health in those nation states. And you don't build confidence by mandating people receive a injected product. You build confidence by providing them the information and allowing them to make an informed decision themselves. This is called respect. And if you don't treat people with respect, generally they tend to rebel and become, in this case, non-compliant. And so Jake seems to think that he and the state have the right to tell you what your child has to be injected with. And that is right at the crux of what's going on here, is that under the new administration, people have the right to self-determination. And they have, if they choose to accept a product and they choose to accept it for their children, and their children get an adverse event, well, they have been informed and they have made that choice. If they choose not to get the product and their child, for instance, develops a infectious disease, then that's their burden also. This is the way things are in classical liberalism and in a open, free democracy, not the socialist, Marxist, utilitarian logic of the state enforcing the greatest good for the greatest number. That is not acceptable to many of us. And as far as I'm concerned, Jake Scott needs to get a clue. If these vaccine products work so great, then herd immunity is not the real issue here. If they work so well, then if you accept the product, you should be personally protected. Now, let me give you an example of that. The mandate has been that all children receive tetanus, diphtheria, and acellular pertussis vaccines, Tdap. The WHO mandated that separate tetanus vaccines shall no longer be available, only the combination product, so that it will force people, particularly in Africa and emerging economies, to get vaccinated against diphtheria and in particular acellular pertussis. So let's look at that. And this, of course, relates to the issue of cocooning, the idea that people shall not, grandparents, uncles, aunts, shall not be allowed to come into contact with newly born children if they have not recently been boosted with all their vaccine series. This is something that the ACIP endorsed years ago without any data. And there's a notorious advertisement that was put out, presumably by the industry, that Aaron Siri got taken down, in which, to scare the public, what was presented was a scene in which a mother is passing a newborn onto the grandmother, and the grandmother, presumably infected with pertussis, transforms, her head transforms into that of the big bad wolf. But here's the thing. Acellular pertussis vaccine does not prevent against infection and spread. All it does is it minimizes the symptoms. So just like the COVID vaccine, it doesn't prevent you from being infected. And in the case of acellular pertussis, there's abundant literature that shows that what happens is it creates carriers that aren't aware that they're infected with pertussis, and they actually become more likely to transmit pertussis to community members and presumably other children, and such as infants. So this policy of advocating for vaccination with acellular pertussis actually increases risk for children. Okay, so, but yet that's a mandated product. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. It absolutely is not science-based, and it's got to stop. This policy of advocating for, I'm using the example of cocooning, tears families apart. Grandparents are told, no, 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 you can't come anywhere near this newborn, and uncles and aunts. And so the normal process of families coming together to celebrate a new birth is prevented. It further isolates parents from the extended family. It's just wrong. It causes all kinds of problems. It has no basis in science. But that is what people like Jake Scott advocate for. That is explicitly advocated for by the American Academy of Pediatrics, that policy.
One last thing on that. Scott Gottlieb, who I have very little respect for, former FDA commissioner
And Mr. Revolving Door.
Yeah, former FDA commissioner under Trump term 1, and now on the board of Pfizer. Yeah, as a continuation of what Jake said, he essentially was fear-mongering that you're going to see a resurgence of pediatric hospitalizations, and you're going to have a big uptick on a number of preventable diseases if we were to move towards the data
Always these
schedule.
people come out with these apocalyptic statements that have no science base, no scientific basis. They're totally inconsistent with what's observed throughout the Western world in developed and wealthy nations. And they're making these apocalyptic statements that are repeated verbatim by the press as if they're truth. They have no data to support them. They then criticize ACIP for not having data. But, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If you're going to make those kinds of statements, you darn well better have the data to support them. And the data aren't there. The practices you pointed out in Canada and Denmark and Sweden and throughout the developed Western world don't support those apocalyptic statements. This is propaganda. When you see this kind of harmonized messaging, particularly with individuals that have close ties to the vaccine industry, you have it. It should be there shouldn't be any question. It's like it's as clear a signal as possible. You're being propagandized.
Yep. Okay, I want to get to the cannabis rescheduling and your vitamin D post, what I think is important to get to. But first of all, you mentioned the influenza thing, and just one thing on that. In June, there was an ACIP vote, and you were a part of that, of course, right?
Correct.
And in that vote, it was the vote was to reaffirm recommendation by a vote of 6-0 for routine annual influenza vaccination for all persons aged over 6 months who do not have contraindications, and to also recommend that children 18 years and younger would receive the seasonal influenza vaccination only in single dose formulations that are free of, I always mispronounce it, but thimerosal,
American,
um, thimerosal as a preservative. And then also
which is mercury.
a vote 5-1 to recommend all adults receive seasonal influenza vaccines only in a single dose formulation without the said preservative. Anything you want to
Yes, so all of that
comment on
was,
that?
remember, that was our first ACIP meeting. We hadn't actually had any working group meetings. The influenza working group that I'm chair of had not even been created yet. And that was presented to us basically as a holdover fait accompli from the prior ACIP. So we really didn't have, there was presentation about thimerosal, and the thimerosal issue was another tempest in a teapot. This is the only flu vaccine still that contains thimerosal. It's been removed from all the others. Is a multi-dose vaccine vial, and there's no reason to administer mercury-containing preservatives to children or adults. And so that was a no-brainer to take that off the schedule. And the endorsement of the flu vaccine schedule was basically a carryover. There wasn't really any opportunity to question that. And to vote against it would have been extremely disruptive. And, we had no data to make that decision. Now we have a lot more data to question influenza vaccine effectiveness. And
How do you have a lot more data now?
because there have been a number of studies to come out since then that clearly demonstrate negative effectiveness, and notoriously one from the Cleveland Clinic, which is fairly large. So this last flu season was not uh, the high point for influenza vaccination, and the data increasingly are showing that the current practices are not meeting expectations. Effectiveness down in the 20%, 30%. That's just not adequate given the risk.
And you alluded to earlier, there's have you started this rigorous review of the data, and will there be
So it's
public
just going
meetings?
to kick off with the publication of the terms of reference, which I, together with Vicky Pebsworth, developed months and months ago. It's been kind of bottled up in the internal vetting process within the CDC.
Okay, before we go, because dinner is waiting, Robert Malone here, and we're almost at Christmas time here. So the cannabis rescheduling. So President Trump, he signed an executive order calling the U.S. Attorney General to reclassify cannabis from a Schedule One narcotic to a Schedule Three drug, placing it in the same category as Tylenol and codeine. This will increase research into cannabis and its potential benefits. Wanted to get your thoughts on that, Robert.
So there's a number of cannabinoid compounds, cannabidiol being one of them, for which there is emerging evidence that they can have therapeutic benefits, and for instance, in PTSD. And the ability to perform medical research on cannabis derived compounds, and cannabis is clearly psychoactive. It has a number of effects on the brain. And we don't really understand what those effects are, what the receptors are, what the pathways are, et cetera, because you can't research that kind of stuff. My wife notoriously used to work for a researcher in this area back at UC Davis when she was working at the Primate Research Center, who told her that as with his grants for the Center for Drug Addiction, that if he ever developed findings and published findings that any of these controlled substances had a positive benefit, he would lose all his funding and basically be blackballed. That's been the environment.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
real
I've reported on
credible
this
medical
before.
research relating to these compounds has essentially been blacklisted. And now we have this new openness to learning and investigating whether there's any merit to the claims that these compounds have medical benefits. And if so, what is the mechanism by which they are developing these medical benefits? Now, what I find particularly intriguing about this is that in theory, cannabis and cannabis extracts may be considered as nutritional supplements. Now, in Canada, the laws about what is commonly called nutraceuticals are much more stringent and restrictive than they are in the United States. In the United States, there are clauses that make it so that these nutritional based, typically natural products, are relatively unregulated in the sense of pharmaceuticals through FDA. It's a carve out, and it's allowed the explosion of this industry of nutritional supplements that are typically naturally derived. And a case could be made that products from marijuana, which are essentially extracts of an herb, uh, might meet those criteria. If so, it would really be transformational in terms of that sector in potential uh, medical benefits associated with these products. And I think that horizon is now opened up by this reclassification. We're not yet there, but it's certainly a lot more conceivable that something like that may come to pass.
And what about critics who, like Alex Berenson, who's been on the show before, who have reported a lot on the link between cannabis usage and psychosis or schizophrenia, particularly in young men? So a lot of people are concerned that this may somehow lead to more accessibility of cannabis in the future and have harmful impact on young people's uh, psychological state,
So
neurological development.
let's examine that just for a moment, put it under the microscope, that logic. What has just been done with the president's directive is to allow, basically, this directive enables medical research. So, if in fact those claims are valid, and they might well be, there's apparently good documentation about differences, massive system-wide differences in central nervous system blood flow under the effects of cannabis use. So it reduces blood flow. So oxygen and blood flow is pretty critical to brain function. So what the president has done is drop the barriers to medical research. And if that medical research documents the things that Mr. Berenson is asserting are risks, then we'll have the information to make a informed decision uh, that, for instance, medical marijuana may not may not have a positive risk benefit, or it may only have a positive risk benefit for certain conditions and not for others. And in order to make those kinds of informed decisions and recommendations, it's necessary to have the data. So all this does is make it possible to have the data. Now, if the data were to come in and demonstrate that, for instance, cannabidiol, CBD, is not causing these neuropsychiatric problems and does have other positive benefits, or the neuropsychiatric problems are minimal compared to the benefits that can be achieved in certain patients, then we'll move forward. That would be the right and proper way to proceed. So I respect that Mr. Berenson has his opinions. He's not a doctor. He's not a drug developer. He is a former New York Times journalist, and he has opinions, and he has the right to those opinions. But I don't see this particular objection having merit. All that this does is make it possible to get the data, to do the science, to allow informed decision making.
Yeah, now he specifically in his Substack says that the reason cannabis is considered a Schedule One substance is not that it is as dangerous as heroin, but that drugs are placed in Schedule One when they have no medicinal value. No medicinal value, they aren't medicine. And he says cannabis is not a medicine for the simplest possible reason: we do not smoke medicines. Tobacco is not a medicine, even though it may contain some beneficial chemicals. Neither is cannabis. We discover medicines
Yeah,
by rigorous scientific
the
study.
route of delivery is irrelevant. Sorry, Alex. Alex,
Yeah.
he's just shooting off his mouth there. Again, this is another straw man. The FDA doesn't discriminate as to whether something's a medicine or not a medicine based on route of administration.
Yeah. And then he goes on to say cannabis may contain certain chemicals that are medically valuable for specific diseases, but when those chemicals like THC, the chemical in cannabis that is responsible for its high, have been tested to treat specific diseases, they have nearly always failed. And he says this won't make a significant impact on research. He says the research has been happening for decades. All it will do is give industry tax breaks and increase access to capital in the banking system, which will just allow cannabis retailers to raise money and expand.
So I respect his opinion. Let's see how this plays out. I once again, this kind of, it smacks of rage farming or outrage farming. He's making a
Hmm.
bunch of unsupported claims that are seem to be designed to provoke an emotional response, and this is a classic method for building your social media audience, following, clicks, likes, and follows, is by saying outrageous stuff. And there we could name certain podcasters and other social media influencers that seem to actively practice this. I'll
Yeah.
just throw one name out, Candace Owens.
Mm.
And that strategy is very, very effective. Saying
Yeah.
outrageous stuff and making claims about things that you can't really back up is a great way to get attention. But you're basically burning your own credibility uh, over the long term by making these kinds of unsupported statements. I choose not to do that, but Alex has got his own style and his own following, and he, you know, I can. The reason why I have a wall of patents behind me is I call it the Alex Berenson wall. It's because Alex attacked me on
Yeah.
a Laura Ingraham show
Yeah. Fox News.
for
Yeah.
making false claims about both ivermectin and about my role in the invention of
I
the
don't think it was
Hepatitis.
Laura, by the way. I think it was a different Fox host.
It was Laura's show with a guest host.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. I remember. Yeah. Yeah. I
I
remember that.
remember it was in the
Yeah.
middle of the night. It was like 3 a.m. I was in Spain shooting a movie, and to my surprise, this guy comes on that I never met before, I never even hardly heard of, and starts attacking me.
Yeah.
It was. I didn't have much coffee on board, so I did my best.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I'll just say on my end, I'd like to host a debate on this cannabis rescheduling topic, and I've invited Alex and some other people, like Dr. Mike Hart, to talk about it. And I'd like to see that before making a more declarative
yeah, great.
statement on my
Right.
view. But I will say I'm generally supportive of the rescheduling. I think it's generally a good thing, while fully considering and respecting Alex's rigorous reporting on the links between cannabis usage and psychosis and schizophrenia in young men in particular. I think that link has been established, but I think the rescheduling is generally a good thing. It does not make sense to have it and other things like MDMA or psilocybin, like psychedelics, in Schedule 1 when we know
I tell
there
you,
are
if
some
you
medical
want to
benefits.
get bent out of shape about that kind of issue, why don't we take on SSRIs?
Mm,
Because if you want to talk about mental illness in young men and young people and the role of various drugs, well, let's start with something that is really in your face, which is the SSRI crisis and the
yeah.
overdosing with Ritalin.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I fully agree. And also CBD, I've heard it holds a great anecdotally, I've heard it work well with a lot of people, and I know clinically it shows a lot of promise in treating things like insomnia, anxiety, PTSD
Hey,
related
we
symptoms.
got to cut it off because Jill has just come into the studio to
Uh oh.
tell me that it's dinner time.
Uh oh. Are you being physically threatened? Are you in danger?
Okay,
uh,
so it's
all
been
right.
fun. I hope that was useful, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your show.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming back on. We'll link to your Substack below. And look forward to your future work with the ACIP. And if you continue to break more news and cause more controversy in the media, then we'll definitely have you back on.
Thanks. Be good.
All right. Thanks.
Bye bye.